Welcome to Hashtag Trending, the weekend edition. The promise and the dilemma of data is one of the great struggles in information technology. There's so much potential. The promise seems so obvious. But the reality is getting real, measurable value from data has proven to be one of information technology's greatest challenges. And now, the promise of artificial intelligence and its ability to analyze data and bring us insights in ways we could have only imagined as little as even a few years ago. It makes it even more important that we find ways to solve these challenges. Now, what better for a long weekend than to explore this topic? My guest today is Steven Karan, the Vice President and Head of Insights and Data for Capgemini Canada. Welcome, Steven.
Thank you, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here. And yeah, I'm very, very excited to talk about this topic that is consistently in the news nowadays. Just try to provide a little bit of perspective and maybe some, realism and practicality behind it.
We've met before, but can you just give our audience just a little introduction to you and what you do?
Yeah, happy to. So my current role is as the Vice President and Head of Insights, Data, and AI at Capgemini here in Canada. And really, my role is really around helping businesses unlock the value of data. That's really what we focus on and what my team and I do. And to do that, especially nowadays, very much around how do you harness this massive amount of data that you've collected as an organization and gain some value through some emerging capabilities and capabilities that have taken root related to AI and generative AI and what follows generative AI in terms of interactive AI. And so we work through kind of that end-to-end life cycle of adoption of AI, everything from looking at what the strategy of an organization needs to be. How do you look at deploying generative AI safely, security, while minimizing business risk as well? And then we look at how do we go through from that stage of strategy to ideation and to understand kind of where the real value in the organization lies. Then building prototypes and making sure those prototypes can scale and actually be of enterprise grade and in quality and driving the business outcomes that are expected. So we have the real privilege to serve clients kind of coast to coast. And through that, we come across a variety of different organizations that are different stages of their maturity and also different stages of where they are in terms of looking at incorporating AI in their business. It's an exciting job, and I'm backed by 200 talented people here in Canada that I absolutely am amazed by their talents. And then we also have some capabilities in offshore delivery centers that support our clients here in Canada as well.
I'm presuming everybody right now starts the conversation with AI. Is that
Mm,
is that really where it begins? The phone rings and somebody
yeah.
wants to talk to you about this. What do they say?
It's so interesting. We've gone through such a maturity, especially in Canada over the last, I would say 12 months when it comes to AI. When GPT kind of hit the mainstream and we saw a very kind of consumer fronted adoption of this new AI capability, you know, 2 months after that fact, we started getting calls from CIOs across the country. And I remember a couple of those calls very clearly where we had a couple of CIOs call us up and say, "Hey, I need your help to come up with a generative AI strategy." And I would say, "Great. What problem are you trying to solve?" And they would tell me, "The problem I'm trying to solve is trying to keep my CEO off my back." And what
Oh,
the funny
wow.
story, but really what's underneath that is, there's a lot of intelligent, mature, experienced CIOs that manage many of our large businesses here in Canada. And those CIOs, just like all of us, we've gone through this hype cycle with different capabilities, be it everything from cloud when it first took root to what we used to call advanced analytics, and then into areas like RPA and other things that as they started to mature. And those that have lived through these hype cycles know that what's really important is actually to kind of go through that first wave of hype, certainly understand what's going on, but not commit yet to any sort of meaningful change to your business until we get through sort of wave two and wave three of that hype, right? So those CIOs really understood that yes, generative AI was going to be a powerful tool, but we needed to give it a little bit of time. Now, typically in our past history, that time would be years, not let's say weeks or months. But what's really interesting is, 6 months later, I had the opportunity to do a masterclass on this topic of generative AI. And I remember sitting in that masterclass and talking about, adoption strategies and talking about different technologies. And the questions that we started to get started to increase in terms of maturity and sophistication. People started to really understand what the technology can do. And so we spent less time on here's kind of the 101 around artificial intelligence and really more looked at kind of practical examples and practical adoption. Now, fast forward 6 more months to now roughly around December 2023, and I was doing a roadshow with one of our big technology partners around this topic of AI. And in the roadshow, we had a cross section of leaders from all facets of Canadian industries. So everything from your regulated industries to tech and pharma companies. And what was really interesting is that by the time we got to that point, majority of people in the room and their companies had already adopted, at least at a prototype stage, generative AI solution. And the challenge that they were having now were more around how do I harden the solution and actually make it enterprise grade? Because we built something, but it's not really scalable, right? So it's interesting that this cycle that we went through with this new capability around AI and generative AI really kind of went through that kind of stages of maturity over like a 12-month period. And so I would say now where we are is most of the conversations I have is yes, it does start with an AI, but there's an inherent understanding to say, well, I really want to do this at scale and safely and securely for my business. Then I need to look at all of the layers underneath the surface of the iceberg, right? How's my infrastructure? What's the state of my data quality? Do I have capabilities both technically and from a talent perspective to actually sustain this new capability for the business in a safe and secure way? So it's really interesting how quickly the conversations have evolved over the last 12 to 18 months and where those conversations are today.
Yeah, I love talking to you because you give me so much to unpack. There's a couple of things I want to tackle in what you
Sure.
said right now. First of all, there is a perception that this has been a consumer-led type
Mhm.
of event, and that everybody's going on and asking ChatGPT questions, but nobody's really doing anything. Now, I know this because I do some work with one of the larger banks, and there are people doing some pretty serious stuff. I think that we can dismiss that myth right now, right? That this is not totally
Absolutely.
consumer-led. There are very serious people looking at use cases.
Absolutely. And I would tell you, you touched on the industry in Canada that's really been at the forefront of the adoption of not just generative AI, but AI in general. Our large financial services institutions have been in this space for about a decade, and they've been using AI for everything in terms of critical use cases like fraud detection and anomaly detection, and have been for several years now. And so the maturity that those organizations have around it is significant. And you're right, we are using, collectively, and when I use the word we, I'm saying we as Canadian businesses and Canadian entities, we have and we are using AI in really meaningful ways, in very important ways. And now I think the conversations are shifting to as newer the capabilities start to really mature, generative AI today, interactive AI kind of 3 to 5 years from now, what are the use cases and the applications? And can I drive kind of a meaningful impact to either kind of top line, bottom line, but also what we're seeing with generative AI is how can I enhance the experience, be it the experience of working in my organization, enhancing the employee experience or improving the customer experience for those that interact and consume products or services through my business as well. So we're going through this like live evolution and this live kind of shift in terms of how the conversations are taking place and where we are actively using this tool today.
Yeah. And and for those people who think that somehow we've forgotten about the hype curve, that CIOs have forgotten, I think there's two things that have struck me about this. One is I've been through this several times. I know there's a hype curve. I've met the
Mhm.
person who invented the hype curve. It's tattooed on me. I know it. But when you're inside it, it's harder to
Mhm.
spot, first of all.
Yeah.
And second of all, not everybody in your business community that you serve knows about the hype curve. So I don't make fun of these CIOs who call you and say, I need a strategy. I've got to deal with my business users. I think they're pretty sophisticated, but they're under tremendous pressure, and I think honestly asking themselves, where are we in the hype curve? Because I don't know.
Absolutely.
I don't know if we're at the
Absolutely.
peak of it now or if we're just funneling down to the trough of despair. I
Mhm.
don't know if there's more hype to come. Every time I think we've gotten to a point where, wow, that's enough for a while, somebody comes out and launches something new.
Yeah.
4.0 for ChatGPT was great. Now Claude 3.5 has come out, and the coding ability of it is astonishing. I'm
Absolutely.
amazed. Do you find that is that the sense you're getting from talking to industry as well?
The sense that myself and CIOs, chief data officers have is that we're living through a moment in history right now. That's the honesty, the way that we feel like we're living through a moment in history that's going to be reflected on in kind of 20 and 30 years to say, wow, like this was a real kind of inflection point. And I can tell you the difference is crystallized for me because when I compare it to, let's say, for example, RPA, robotic process automation,
Yep.
that went through a prototypical hype cycle not too long ago, right? It's probably about 5 years ago now. There's a fundamental difference in terms of where we are in terms of generative AI and the sort of the cycle and the stage of the cycle versus RPA. And here's the difference. RPA was never a topic of conversation at the board level. Never a topic of conversation, right? It was a topic of conversation certainly in IT. It was certainly a topic of conversation in different kind of administrative functions in a business, but it was never at the critical mass at the board level. Today, when we survey the organizations that we work with in Canada, as well as globally, typically what we find is that somewhere between 90 to 95% of board have generative AI and the adoption of generative AI as a board topic, right? So the level of importance, the level of mind share at the executive and board level that this tool has caused is unlike what I saw with IRPA. And maybe the last equivalency in terms of last milestone or great invention was probably cloud. I would say probably cloud was the last time we saw this level of awareness and eagerness at the board level. And what we're seeing as well, to tie kind of the board level equation with the consumer level, is I'm always astonished when I look at these figures and I see that, for example, in Canada, 73% of the Canadians that we have surveyed through our Capgemini Research Institute say they inherently trust the content that's generated by generative AI. Right. And that is a figure that is astonishing. And now sometimes when you look at that figure, you think to yourself, well, got to be because folks don't really sometimes understand that generative AI is not always accurate and there's some risk and harm. And absolutely that's the case. But if you think about, well, why is it then that 73% of Canadians trust generative AI? It's because they're getting value from it, right? The folks
Yeah.
and the individuals that are using it, be it, if you're a college student doing some research with Copilot, or you are a busy full-time parent who is now using a generative AI chatbot to get you some of your questions around your bills answered, like we're seeing value from it. And as a result of seeing value from it, we are starting to inherently see the trust elevated when it comes to generative AI. So these two factors in terms of board level conversation, board level mindset, and mind share around this topic, plus the inherent level of trust increasing dramatically with this tool is unlike anything I've seen in my career and is fundamentally different than where we were with many of the other technologies, emerging technologies that have come over the last decade or two.
And the potential impact is so much greater. And
Mm,
not only the potential impact, but the speed at which it'll occur. Cloud
mm,
was a big excitement, but that's a decade of transition.
absolutely.
Where we've come in 2 years has been astonishing. And I'm reading yesterday from somebody from Citigroup. Now, Citigroup is a big financial organization. They're saying they think 50% of their jobs will be affected. That
Yeah.
I don't think we've seen anything like that in my lifetime.
Yeah. We are really living through a moment in history and
Yeah.
the impact on people, the impact on talent. This is the thing that probably consumes much of my thinking and much of my attention as well. And, I look at it from kind of a practical lens of who I am as a business leader, certainly, but I also look at it from a personal lens. I have a 9-year-old and I have a 2-year-old in the house, right? And the 9-year-old has been using generative AI technologies for the last probably 8 months, right? And about 2 months ago, we found this fantastic generative AI product called Udio. And Udio is like large music models. So you have large language models and you
Yep.
have large music models, large image models. And it's a great tool. It's very simplified and it allows basically anybody with a tune or a melody, some lyrics, or in the case of my kids, a funny idea to use generative AI. Here's how they used it just last weekend. My 9-year-old cracks open her laptop and asks our 2-year-old, hey, what should we write a song about? 2-year-old says flamingos. 9-year-old says, great, I love it. And so she goes in, she creates a couple prompts of flamingo. Here's what I think the chorus is. Let's use this kind of tune and melody. And lo and behold, kind of spits out an initial draft of a song. And then I work with her and I refine it. We add prompts and do some engineering for the bridge and the outro and some of the verses and stuff like that. And 45 minutes later, she publishes a song that you would swear took about 4 months and was done by a professional band and professional producer and things of that nature, right? So the fact that a 9-year-old is using this technology and is getting value from technology and is, by the way, doing kind of prompt engineering, an actual sort of normal business activity that you engaged in or technical activity that you engage when you use these solutions is fantastic, right? And so when I think about her today, and then I think about her entering the workforce in kind of 10 to 15 years, I think to myself, like, this is going to be dramatically different. Historically, as a professional, you would live through potentially your entire working career in one age, industrial age, information age. Now, her and perhaps myself as well, we're maybe have our careers elapsed over 2 or 3 ages. I entered the workforce during the information age. I'm in the middle of my working career and I'm about to hit the artificial information age as sort of the underdriver. And then, oh, by the way, wrapping around all of this is going to be climate change and the impact that climate change will have on ways of working, jobs, the types of jobs that are going to be in demand. All this is going to be phenomenal in terms of the adaptability that we as professionals, as citizens will need to have in order to continue to have, thriving economies, thriving businesses, thriving families as well. So it's really astonishing kind of where this technology is, how it's going to evolve, the impact as well. And I'm seeing it in my household with my own children. And I know I'm not the only one.
It's amazing what the potential is, and we can get onto the
Mhm.
next generation. I want to go back to the RPA example you gave, because I think
Yeah.
there's something there that I think really makes sense to me. And that is, there is a great similarity of those people, though, who were successful with RPA, were the people who had, I would call them small victories at first. There were things that they did that were practical, that
Mhm.
got a great result. I did a piece on Alberta healthcare, and
Mm.
they were fantastically successful with RPA
Yes.
because they concentrated on ideas that most people go, well, that's just a small idea. That
Yep.
small idea 1,000 times. I remember them telling me the biggest problem we have is scheduling appointments. We spend
Mhm.
hours and hours and hours scheduling appointments. If we could automate that, we'd save tons of people, and they did. I think we alluded to that. After people come in for a strategy, can you talk them into really looking at use cases that are going to have practical benefits to them? Are they
Mm.
receptive to that?
Yeah, absolutely. The way I typically describe this for both business and IT leaders that I have the opportunity to have conversations with on this topic is I advise around looking at areas in your business or your organization that is causing friction, right? So why friction, right? Friction inherently creates slowness. It slows down progress. Friction also causes disengagement by either employees or by customers as well. And friction inherently is also causes annoyance, right? So creates annoyance for either your employees or your staff as well. So if you look at areas in your business that are creating and causing friction today, you are likely going to be narrowing down on some use cases that you can look to apply this technology to remove that friction and enhance the overall engagement and to create speed and operational efficiency. So the way we think about what happens after the strategy and how do you adopt this kind of successfully, really to me, it's 5 steps. And I would tell you like 3 or 4 of those steps are relatively easy. And then there's a step that is the difficult step that really will determine, can you leverage this tool in an impactful kind of scalable and enterprise level within your organization. So as I mentioned, kind of step number 1, look at where that friction is. And then the other thing that I see that is really successful after that step 2, if you bring all those ideas together, you bring individuals, be it from IT, business, other stakeholder groups together, and you look at this grouping of potential use cases you identify and kind of quickly put them through some kind of funnel where you prioritize like the 2 or 3 that we think is going to add the most value, add the most impact to the business. And then what you do is in the next step is you absolutely, as quickly as possible, and I can't stress the importance of that, as quickly as possible, you try to prototype a solution or, with a capability like AI, generative AI, RPA, you need to try to figure out, is the desired outcome that we thought this use case was going to deliver, is it actually being delivered? Is it actually possible? So you're validating it with that prototype stage. Now, If you get to that stage of you build that prototype and you're kind of assessing the impact, you're assessing the validity, like you've gotten to the stage where 95% of business can get. And at the stage, you're going to be very easily able to identify you have an idea that makes sense and this technology is providing you the output and the outcome that you expect. And you're also going to find many cases where, that's not the case. And it is completely okay to fail at the stage. And in
Yep.
some cases, in many ways, like if you get to this thing at step 3 and you find like 100% of the prototypes that you build pass that mustard and are ready to move to that next step, I think we're doing something wrong. Like some of these examples do have to fail because you do have to scrutinize. So now here's the hard step. So the next 2 steps are the really hard steps. What we need to do at this stage is look at what we built at that prototype level and really scrutinize it and start building and enhancing and evolving it. This is where, after validating the outcome, we now need to make sure is the underlying data of quality and is it then producing output and predictions that we can trust. Is the prototype that I build, what do I need to do to kind of scale it? Adding services and adding capabilities to it to ensure that it can run successfully at an enterprise level. And can I do this cost effectively? Because one of the things that often surprises a business and a business leader is the cost to sustain a newer capability like a solution built on generative AI is probably 2 to 3x what you originally think it's going to cost.
Yeah.
You got to make sure you can sustain the cost and make sure that the risks are minimized as well. And then after you do that, deploy it, make people use it. Absolutely. But keep a human in the loop. So there's someone looking at the outcomes, making sure these hallucinations that some of these models are known for are happening, or the model drift, as it's known for as well, isn't occurring, and can refine and bring back the learnings around how to modify what we built to make it even better. So that's typically the 5 steps. And again, after step number 3 is the hard step. And this is typically where we see some challenges.
But I want to track back because you and I
Yeah.
have lived parallel lives on this thing. I used to say we're gonna pick 4 things we're gonna do, and the
Mhm,
reason we're gonna pick 4 is because one of them's gonna knock it out of the park. 2 of
mhm,
them could be a yawn, and one of them's
mhm.
gonna fail. And I said the
Yeah,
only thing I can't tell you is which one.
that's right.
And you know, and it's really true. If you don't hit barriers, if you don't have some failure in these things, you haven't been trying anything. Do you find that inviting people into that decision process gives them even a greater level of commitment to the success of it?
It not only absolutely. So the short answer is yes. By inviting people into the process and making this an entirely transparent process that we're going through as a business, it creates a level of commitment. It creates a level of buy-in as well. But inherently, when we do something new as a business, and adopting an AI model is new, adopting generative AI is new, adopting RPA in the past was new. When we do something new as a business, we also have to build that muscle memory as an organization around how does this actually work, right? What do I, as an individual, need to contribute? What am I expecting from somebody else? Where are the things that we didn't think about initially, be it in terms of a technical issue or process issue, and as well as the adoption factor. And so as you go through this together in a transparent way and you go through this process, you build that muscle memory as a collective organization so that the second, the third, the fourth time you get through, you're going to be much more efficient, much more effective. And I always find 100% of the example that I work with in my past where it is a collaborative process across technical teams and non-technical teams, and sometimes inviting other stakeholders, for example, union representatives or customer advocacy teams into the mix, just will make sure that your outcomes are not only the right outcome, but people are bought in and you're building that kind of snowball effect going down a hill of being able to get more and more buy-in, more and more potentially investment to further leverage and scale the technology. But you're right, like transparency is absolutely key.
And then you get to that piece that we talked, that piece of the iceberg, and that's the quality of the data. And you've mentioned
Mm,
it. I think a lot of people have had some lunch bag letdown about data analytics in general when they've got
mhm.
great ideas and they work with small samples of data. But then we try and use the big data that we have and find out that we can't make it work.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that?
It's funny. I think any leader that I speak to in an organization intuitively knows where pockets of poor data quality exist. Because we as leaders will receive 100 reports, and we know when we receive report X or report Y, we're not going to trust it because we know inherently that the data underneath that is a little bit wonky. There's some gap there. So we all know that. But also in the past, what's happened is there's been a tendency to just swipe that on the rug, right? Just ignore it, swipe it on the rug, leave it for another day. There's this burning dumpster fire of an issue that I need to tackle that's far more critical and far more important. But what the adoption of AI and generative AI in particular has done, it's created this like big honking supernova of a spotlight that is now being shone on these, these data quality issues because it's that, as everybody knows, garbage in, garbage out, certainly. But what you see very quickly when you use a capability like an AI or generative AI is your outcomes, your interactions with your employees, your interaction with your customers that you're using this tool for is going to be severely hampered, potentially damaging to your business, potentially damaging to your brand. So now what we have swept under the rug for the last 5 or 6 years needs to be brought back into the spotlight, really cleaned. And it's Jim, the issue is it's really hard. It's like hard work because it's not a one-time endeavor to go in and address poor data quality, right? It's a continuous element of what needs to be built into kind of the fabric of your, to have the right processes, governance, and tools in place to address data quality. But now the execution is no longer there because the outcome of bad data quality, the risk to potentially your business and your brand is so significant that the spotlight that's now being shunned has caused a lot of focus and a lot of attention. And I would tell you as a business, what we're seeing, yes, we are seeing a lot of calls for help around innovation and prototyping with AI and generative AI, but we're also receiving probably 1.5 to 2x the number of calls for help for helping me address the underlying engineering and data quality layer that needs to be in place, that house that needs to be in order to support these tools and support our investments. So it is very much in the forefront nowadays.
And the ironic challenge is that if you don't use the data, the quality gets worse. I've
Mm,
found that if you start using data, people start using it, they'll start finding ways to improve the quality. It's almost like
yeah,
that's sort of one of the things, which one do you start first? Well, you have to do both. That's a
you do.
tough thing for an organization to adopt or to adapt to.
Yeah, it's almost like many organizations now are trying to adopt the mentality and the ways of working of pioneering kind of tech companies from 10 years ago. And if you're a large bank or a regulated a utility or regulated telco in our country, that's not easy to do. There's not easy to do because you have certain defined processes and existing ways of working. And let's be fair, we also have organizations that have traditionally have had a low tolerance for risk and a low tolerance for failure.
Yep.
But what we're seeing now is that that tolerance needs to be shifted a bit, especially if we're going to move into the areas of these new capabilities. And the underlying quality and the underlying data quality needs to be addressed in parallel with the innovation that you're doing. And in some respects, I do think if you focus purely on addressing the data quality first without innovating, you're probably going to be left behind where your competitors are going. Because again, this is not a 1 month issue to solve for. It's an evergreen and or everlasting element or focus that needs to be embedded into the business.
And the other piece of it, though, is that I think we have to get over it to some extent.
Hmm.
Data's never going to be perfect.
Mm.
That's its nature. It will never be absolutely accurate or absolutely perfect. And yet we make these sort of demands that we would never make under any other circumstance. I started out in banking, believe it or not, with paper cards that people
Mhm.
did all kinds of numbers on, and they
Yes.
typed them up, and they were relatively accurate. Very few people went in and said, "You don't
Mhm.
have the right answer for me." That happened infrequently. When I did a data conversion of that, I found a massive amount of errors, and we had a whole area
Mhm.
that just dealt with that. I think anytime you start taking in data, you're going to have to deal with inaccuracy, but somehow we put it under a much bigger microscope.
Yeah.
And that gets in our way. I think it's this idea that you've got to use it, and you have to work with cleaning it at the same time. I think that's what you said. And I think that without those two happening at the same time, it just doesn't seem to work.
Yeah. You're right. You got to use it. You got to consistently kind of look at it as well. But it's also a circumstance where, the quality issue and poor pocket of data quality will always exist as well, as we talked about. But it's really around how do you quickly bring those to the spotlight and to the surface and have the right processes and tools in place to rectify and remedy as an organization. And the nice thing is the way to solve this problem is different than 10 years ago, right? Now what you do have is AI enabled like data quality solutions out there. You
Yeah.
can go find these pockets and bring them to the surface much quicker, provide some degree of interference and recommendations around how you think. So the way we solve this problem, just like the use cases we're trying to build, it's changed, and my perspective is a good thing because now we're using kind of innovative technologies to look at addressing the things that have typically been again underneath the surface of the iceberg.
And I think sometimes the things we mistake for data quality issues are data structure issues. I mean, I've always been mystified by how much dark data companies have. And many times it's not because it's inaccurate, because they don't know what to call it. They don't know how to find it. They don't know how to use
Yeah.
it. And if you've ever run a file through Chat GPT, even it's
hmm
data analytics right now, does astonishing things at being able to identify and structure data. So do you think we will unlock part of our dark data?
You know, this focus and this renewed effort to really look at adopting technologies like AI kind of in a safe way, as we talked about, it's putting a spotlight on different things, right? Spotlight on data quality is one. Also, a spotlight around not only kind of dark data, but where business processes by their nature are creating that dark data, and also where you have shadow data, right? So data that is not your kind of official source, system of record data, but is being used somewhere in the business and being used to make some decisions and have kind of existed on a dark kind of island by themselves for many, many years. And all of that is being brought to the surface because again, what is I think inherently understood is garbage in, garbage out. But what's not inherently understood when it comes to these capabilities is that you as an organization typically, and I'll say the word typically, will not have the quantity or the quality or the array of data that's going to be needed to really train a model. And so what oftentimes you'll need to do is create synthetic data. But here's the thing. Synthetic data is going to be built based off of the underlying baseline data that you have in the organization. So that's data that was previously in the shadow, previously in the dark, or data that's got quality issues that we've talked about. Then your synthetic data is going to be accurate. And then lo and behold, the predictions, the outcomes, and the statements that they come out from an AI model will be inaccurate as well. So it's this big spotlight that is really magnifying what's happening today in businesses. And I think as this technology matures, as business leaders grapple with this technology, I think everybody has starting to get sort of practical understanding of what this can do to business, be it like increasing our sales by X% or creating X, efficiencies of operational efficiencies by X%. And I think what it's also doing is finally bringing to the spotlight the things that we've swept under the rug before, like poor data quality, but now also in terms of where we have shadow teams creating shadow data and where we have business processes that are inherently causing this kind of, as I mentioned before, friction to occur in our business that is ultimately creating and leading to things like poor data quality, shadow data, data that's not accurate, data that's not timely. And so there's this whole host of problems that are now being brought to service. And I think that's a good thing. It's ultimately something that I think businesses have to address. And if it's taken, the tremendous public kind of mindset and mind share around generative AI to do it, great. I'm all for it. I think it's time we start addressing these problems, but understand that again, it's something that's going to be a everlasting need to address. It's not a one-time fix and resolve.
Thing I liked about you since the first venture, Stephen, was practical optimism. That's how
Mhm.
when we had our first conversation together, I walked away and said, this guy's practical but optimistic. In that light,
Mhm.
wh- what do you think the next 12 months look like for your clients and for Canadian businesses?
Well, I'm glad that you said the time frame over 12 months because I'll tell you, if you ever meet somebody in this industry who tells you, I know exactly where to invest in AI over the next 3 to 5 years, chances are you met a time traveler because that's the only explanation I have.
Yeah.
Because unless you're a
Yeah.
time traveler, there's no way that you know exactly where this is going. And I
I
couldn't
once
tell
heard a
you,
CIO say on a clear day, I can see 8 weeks.
That's right. That's right. And so I'd tell you in 12 months, I would tell you, yeah, I have a fairly good sense of where I think this technology is going to evolve. And I think I have a fairly good sense of kind of what businesses can do. So my sense is what we're seeing today in terms of generative AI solutions and services and the providers that enable it, that will, get to a point where over the next 12 months, we will see very clearly kind of probably 3 to 4 globally dominant providers of generative AI kind of foundational services. So foundational models, large language models, so on and so on. And probably over that same period of time, there's going to emerge probably 3 to 4 dominant players in terms of services, consulting and technology services around enabling those models for businesses, right? And what I do think is not going to really harden over the next 12 months, maybe over the next kind of 12 to 24 months after that, is really what will be what I call industry specific foundational models. So think, for example, a large model, a large language model for healthcare or a large image model for a telco. Those don't exist yet. And I don't expect those to exist in the next 12 months as well. So when I'm advising business, when I look at what do I recommend you invest in today? I always tell business leaders, and both technical and non-technical, is get your house in order. And what I mean by that is get the underlying infrastructure that you need to safely, securely sustain these services. Look at also training and upskilling and developing your people, and very much look at making sure that you don't get locked into any one provider when it comes to a foundational capability, a foundational model, and really make sure that you have processes in place and technologies in place that will allow you to kind of pivot and adapt as you see things emerging in the market and as you see dominant players come from a specific industry. So I do believe we're going to go through a gradual, and I do think it's gradual, especially in our country, where we're going to see a gradual increase in adoption of generative AI, and the use cases around generative AI will gradually increase. My view is that other geographies, for example, the US and US based businesses, are probably somewhere around 6 to 12 months in advance of where Canadian businesses are today. I do think we have the ability to catch up. But am I expecting in the next 12 months to see a headline from the Globe and Mail that says, the CIO of this company or the CEO of this company has been replaced by artificial intelligence? No, I don't think we're going to get to that point in 12 months.
Not yet. Yeah, I think that we chase some mysteries. I've told people, everybody wants to talk about when artificial general intelligence is going to get here, and I say, why? What do you care? Why do you care when it's going to replace the CIO or the CEO?
Yeah.
The fact is, you're missing the practical applications you could be putting in place today by thinking about something that may or may not happen. No matter whether AI achieves consciousness, it's going to be a foundation of running a business.
I agree with you. I fundamentally have stopped thinking about, where and when or if AGI is possible, because I did spend probably, close to a couple months just going down deep Google searching session and rabbit holes. And what I found is there's no consensus, and the preeminent thinkers and the preeminent innovation and technologists in the space are not aligned around where and when and if it can happen. And ultimately, fundamentally, as you said, doesn't really matter. What does matter, though, I would say, is if you're, and I'll say this from two different lenses, if you're a parent who is getting ready to help direct your child into the workforce, what does matter today is they need to, regardless of the industries that they work in, the profession that they're going to go into, there needs to be a degree of comfort of being able to use these technologies and just being comfortable with what they are, how they're used, and also by inherently what you'll be developing is an inherent understanding of where is it not appropriate to use these technologies today? Where do I need to look at really scrutinizing and perhaps not trusting some of the output that is being delivered as well? So I think, for those who are managing young professionals, young minds, be it as teachers, coaches, parents, whatever it may be, I think we have a responsibility to make sure that we're looking at safe uses, safe adoption of these technologies. And I'd say with my business leader hat on, what I am very much focused on around is let's make sure that the teams that we build to support, to build, to work with these technologies are inclusive teams, teams that have diverse inputs, diverse experiences, and ultimately can make sure through that diversity of thought and diversity of critical thinking, make sure that ultimately the models that we build and how they serve our clients' communities are very much aligned with what we would expect a Canadian business to do. So I do think that's probably where I've encouraged people to vector towards putting more effort and more attention versus trying to read headline after headline around how far away from AGI we are at this point.
Yeah. And I've asked you for a practical prediction. My final question for you
Yeah.
is what's your hope in a Canadian sense? What's your hope for what we will do with AI?
My hope is that we as Canadians really, really do understand that there is immense potential behind this technology and immense risk. And we do not leave it all to the governments to help figure out how do we use these technologies safely and securely. What I do believe will happen in the future, may not be 12 months, maybe beyond that, is this topic of sovereign AI and sovereign generative AI will become an issue and will impact at some point the types of AI services a business can buy in this country, who they can buy it from, and how they deploy those services to serve Canadian communities and constituents. And so my hope is we understand that there's immense potential behind this capability and this technology. And my hope is that we do rally around and put in the necessary investments in R&D and time and effort to really be forefront of this technology. And again, my hope is that we all feel like we have a stake in this and we don't rely on any one individual level of government to create these answers for us and to solve these problems for us.
My guest today has been Steven Karan, the Vice President and Head of Insights. And I love the title, Head of Insights. You've given us a lot and data for Capgemini Canada. Thank you so much for coming in, Steven.
Thank you as well, Jim. It's been a pleasure and enjoy the weekend.
I will. And to our audience, thank you for spending part of your weekend with us. I'm off for the rest of the week, but I'll be back on July 8th with the Daily Tech News for #trending in the summertime. I'm your host, Jim Love. Have a great weekend.